Hello folks, it's the Pacer Chaser again. Welcome to another one of my videos. In this one we're going to look at Saltburn Motor Services, who served Saltburn and the surrounding area from 1928 through to 1974. We'll start with a quick history of the company, and then we'll look at some photographs of its vehicles. Then we'll have a look at some timetables from just after the company was taken over in the 1970s. And we'll also talk about the unique feature of Saltburn Motor Services, which, to be fair, if you've read the full title of the video, you'll already know about. So for anyone not familiar with Saltburn, it's on the coast of North Yorkshire. As you can see just beyond Whitby there, you've got Whitby. If you carry on going around the coast, you come to Saltburn. And if you carry on going a bit further, you get to Redcar and then the River Tees and on towards Middlesbrough and that kind of area. So you've got Saltburn itself, and then nearby you've got Loftus, Liverton Mines, Liverton, Moorshome, Lingdale, Skelton, just there, Gisborough, and if you carry on down the road there, you've got Stokesley. And if you go a lot further than that, along the same road, you get to Thirsk, and then down towards York and that kind of area. So that's the area we're looking at. So the story begins in the early 1920s with two small operators in the area that are relevant to our story. The first was Cleveland Motor Services. They're in around the Gisborough and Lingdale areas and later expanded to include places like Whitby, whilst Keith M. Watson of Saltburn was running an hourly service from Saltburn to Loftus via Saltburn Bank, Broughton and Carlinhow. Saltburn Bank's got a 1 in 4 gradient and some hairpin bends on it. It's quite a formidable challenge for buses, even to this day. For whatever reason, Cleveland Motor Services wasn't successful and ceased trading in 1928. It was quite unusual for the time, really, because this was before bus services had to be licensed. So if you didn't make money on the services you were running, you normally just relocated to somewhere else. But for whatever reason, as I say, Cleveland Motor Services ceased trading in 1928. One of its now redundant employees was a Mr. J.C. Pickering, and he decided to set up business on his own. And on November the 19th, 1928, he took over Mr. Watson's service along with 3 vehicles. Some sources say that Mr. J.C. Pickering was a director of Cleveland Motor Services, but some of them don't say that, so there's a bit of confusion. I think, really, having looked at the history of Saltburn Motor Services, he probably wasn't, because I think if he'd been a director of Cleveland Motor Services, it might have succeeded, but I can't say for definite. As I say, some sources say he was a director and some say he wasn't, but in some capacity he worked for Cleveland Motor Services, and then when they ceased trading, as we say, he set up on his own, and he bought out Keith Watson's business. The 3 vehicles he started with, 2 of them were in working order. They were a Didion Bouton and a REO Sprinter, and there was also a REO Speedwagon, which was withdrawn and in a derelict condition. Just a bit of an aside, any music fans might be familiar with the band REO Speedwagon, and yes, they were named after the bus chassis, but they used a bit of artistic license with the pronunciation. The company was set up in Michigan in the US by Ransom E. Olds, who had previously been the founder of the Oldsmobile Company. He left Oldsmobile to set up a new venture, which was REO, and although the name of the company was his initials, it was always pronounced REO and not REO. So Mr. Pickering's new bus service was known as Saltburn Motor Services. As well as the Loftus service, they also started to run private hires, excursions and tours. Under the Road Traffic Act of 1930, the company was obliged to obtain a licence for the service to Loftus, and also for the excursions and tours, which it did. It also applied for permission to run duplicate vehicles as required between 10 o'clock in the morning and 2300, for the very British reason that when it started to rain in Saltburn, all the day trippers who had made their way there suddenly made a beeline for the nearest bus stop to go home all at once, and gave rise to a massive surge in traffic. The traffic commissioners were not convinced by the argument, and initially gave permission to duplicate only between 1800 and 2300. However, at the first annual review in 1931, this was amended to allow duplication from 1400 to 2300. So as we said, they also built up excursion and private hire work, adding extra vehicles as needed. Regular destinations for the excursions were Staves and Runswick Bay, both of which cost 2 shillings and 6pence per person. The company's success was due to what would nowadays be called the proactive approach of Mr. Pickering, who displayed a typical Yorkshire flair for making money. An example comes from the 1930s, when one day there were no private hire bookings. Rather than allow the 4 coaches that would normally be used on private hire and their drivers to stand around idle, Mr Pickering began touting for customers for an ad hoc excursion to Runswick Bay. He managed to fill 3 of the coaches completely, and all except 6 seats on the 4th, and the excursion was just about to depart when a group of 10 people turned up wishing to travel. Rather than turn them away and lose the business or run the coaches overloaded, Mr Pickering rushed home to fetch his own private car, in which he conveyed the 4 extra passengers who couldn't fit onto the coach, and that way he preserved the business. He got the 10 fares. By 1938, the tours and excursions work had expanded. The company were operating as far away as the Lake District on tours and excursions, and they bought a couple of luxury specification coaches, which they marketed as parlour coaches, and they were used on the longest and/or the more exclusive runs. Unfortunately, when World War II broke out in 1939, those 2 coaches were commandeered by the military and were never returned. During the Second World War, Mr Pickering was appointed the liaison officer to the Ministry of Transport for the area, which covered as far as Whitby, Hartlepool and Osmotherley. He would help to arrange transport for the various military establishments and factories, etc. within the area, using other companies' vehicles as well as his own. Some of Saltburn Motor Services vehicles found themselves working well out of the normal area on war-related work, including one which spent a period of time working in York and 5 that worked around Aycliffe in County Durham. Because they were doing a lot of war-related work, the company was allocated a number of Bedford OWB utility single-deckers by the Ministry of Supply to assist with its transport commitments, and these were so successful they led to orders for the peacetime version, the Bedford OB, after the war had finished. Finally, in the wartime, in 1944, Saltburn Motor Services was made into a limited company, with Mr J.C. Pickering as its director. Shortly after the war ended in 1945, construction began of large ICI chemical works at Wilton, near Redcar. Saltburn Motor Services, or SMS for short, won contracts for the carriage of construction workers to and from the site, as well as running from its normal operation area. As many as 17 vehicles ran from Whitby to the construction site every working day. 17, that's a hell of a lot. Many extra vehicles are required to operate the contracts, and the fleet reached its all-time maximum size of 44 vehicles. After construction was completed, SMS was successful in gaining some works contracts to transport workers to and from Wilton, and they also gained several school service contracts. The schools and work services saw double-deckers enter the fleet for the first time. In the 1950s, Saltburn Motor Services bought out 2 other local bus and coach companies. Firstly, in January of 1954, the business of John Dunning, who traded as Green Line, was acquired. This brought a service from Saltburn to Thirsk via Gisborough and Stokesley, although after a few years SMS gave up the section from Stokesley to Thirsk as it was unremunerative. The second purchase in May 1957 was of Jackson's Cleveland Coaches of Gisborough, who had a depot in Northgate in that town. Although Cleveland Coaches did not operate any conventional stage carriage services, they deliver works contracts from Great Ayton to ICI Wilton, and another from Gisborough to the Grangetown area, just east of Middlesbrough. As double-deckers could not fit into the depot at Gisborough, SMS bought the land next to it so as to provide open-air parking for them. The land purchase was more than needed for parking, so with typical business flair, some lock-up garages were erected on the remainder of the site and then leased out to members of the public, bringing in extra revenue. The purchase of the former Green Line service seemed to give SMS a renewed enthusiasm for such operations, and in August 1956 a new service was introduced between Saltburn and the Hollybush estate at Skelton. At around the same time, the original service to Loftus was extended to and from Liverton and Moorshome on certain days of the week, and over the ensuing years various other services were introduced, including a Saturdays only route from Loftus to Blackpool. This was designed for those staying for a week at a Lancashire resort rather than for day trippers, as the vehicle spent just 1.5 hours in Blackpool before making the return journey. For many of the notes so far, I'm indebted to an article by John M. Banks in the April 1966 edition of Buses Illustrated magazine. It's interesting to note the services which operated at that time, which were as follows. So stage carriage services operated, i.e. normal bus services, were operated from Saltburn to the Hollybush estate, consisting of 4 journeys daily in summer and 3 journeys on weekdays only in the winter. From Saltburn to Loftus ran every half hour, with 4 journeys on Tuesday and Saturday, extended to Liverton Mines, Liverton and Moorshome. The Saltburn to Stokesley service ran hourly in the summer and 2 hourly in the winter. In addition to those, there was the express service already mentioned from Loftus to Blackpool, which ran, as we said, on Saturdays only. The extra services in the summer led to the employment of seasonal drivers and conductors. Works contracts were from Gisborough and Great Ayton to ICI Wilton, and from Gisborough to the Dom and Long Steel Works at Lazenby, whilst extensive school services were run from Great Ayton to Stokesley and Gisborough, Hutton Gate near Gisborough to Gisborough and Redcar, Hinderwell to Staves and Loftus, Easington, Scaling, Liverton and Moorshome to Loftus, Kirkleatham to Loftus, Boosbeck to Gisborough and Lingdale to Broughton. These services, plus the various excursions, tours and private hires, were worked by a fleet of 21 vehicles, of which 19 were single deck and 2 double deck. Throughout its existence, Saltburn Motor Services had shared the area with a much larger United Automobile Company, who by the 1960s were part of the nationalised Tilling Group. Indeed, they had been for many years by that point. Whilst the works contracts towards the Grangetown and Lazenby areas would have put its vehicles in contact with those of the Teesside Railless Traction Board. In 1968, local government reorganisation saw the creation of the Teesside County Borough, as part of which TRTB was combined with the Corporation Transport Departments of Middlesbrough and Stockton to form Teesside Municipal Transport. Then, in 1969, the former Tilling and BET groups were combined to form the National Bus Company, meaning that the already enormous United Automobile Company became part of an even larger organisation. To give you an idea of how large United was, you could travel on its local bus services all the way from Berwick-on-Tweed down to Leeds, so it was a really, really large company. Barely had the dust settled on all of that when another local government reorganisation happened in 1974, and that saw Teesside County Borough replaced by the County of Cleveland, and Teesside Municipal Transport was replaced by the catchily titled Langbarth, Middlesbrough and Stockton-on-Tees Joint Committee, which luckily decided on a much snappier trading name of Cleveland Transit. Throughout all this upheaval, SMS continued quietly operating its services. However, on the 1st of August 1974, the company was sold to Cleveland Transit, including the depots at Saltburn and Gisborough, the services and the entire fleet, which at the time consisted of 22 buses and coaches. One of those was a double-decker, the other 21 were single-deckers. The Gisborough depot closed at some time during the 1970s, although vehicles were outstationed in Gisborough. I think they were parked on the car park in the centre of the town. After that, the Saltburn depot was returned by Cleveland Transit until the early 1980s, at which point it was closed and the vehicles moved to the ex-TRTB garage at South Bank, which itself closed in 1986. So we're looking at some photographs from my collection as I've been going through the history there, and we'll just look at them again and some additional ones as well. The livery of Saltburn Motor Services was red and cream. You'll have to set my word for that, because all of the photographs that I've managed to find that are not copyrighted are monochrome. But the first one here shows vehicle number JVN 354, which was fleet number 19. It was a Bedford SB with duple Vega body, and it was new to Saltburn Motor Services in 1953. It was withdrawn in 1967 and it wasn't traced any further than that. For these parts of the notes, I've referred to the PSV circle history of Cleveland Transit and its predecessor Teesside Municipal Transport, should I say. Secondly, we've got 1361 PT. This is a Bedford SB1 with Plaxton Embassy body. It's got a fairly local registration, which leads you to falsely believe it might have been new to Saltburn, but it wasn't. It was second hand. It was new to Wilkinson of Sedgefield in County Durham in January of 1961. It was acquired by Saltburn Motor Services in December 1962, and it was their fleet number 26. It passed the Cleveland Transit in August of 1974 with the rest of the company, and Cleveland Transit numbered it 342 and then almost immediately renumbered it S342. Decided to put prefix letters in front of the fleet numbers so that the administrative staff could tell what sort of vehicle it was. So S was single decker. So yeah, S342 by the end of 1974. It was withdrawn in 1976 and sold to a dealer at Carlton in Yorkshire. It worked for unknown owners for a few years before it resurfaced again with what was called the Catholic Handicapped Children's Fellowship in Teesside. They provided transport for children with disabilities to give them days out and things. It appeared with that fellowship in 1980, and how long it stayed with them isn't recorded. Next up, we've got XUP 629, which was fleet number 39 in the Saltburn fleet. Again, it's got a fairly local registration, but again, it wasn't new to Saltburn. They got a policy of buying quite a few decent second-hand vehicles. So it was a Bedford SB8 with dual Midland bodywork. It was new to Summerson Brothers, who traded as the Eden of West Auckland in 1957. They withdrew it in March 1963 after an accident, and it was sold to a dealer in Loughborough called Yates, who sold it on to Saltburn Motor Services in May 1963. It's not recorded whether the dealer repaired it or whether Saltburn did. It was withdrawn in 1970, so it didn't pass the Cleveland Transit, and it was sold to W North, the dealer of Sherburn and Elmet, in November of 1970, and presumably scrapped. Next up, we've got DPY 582C, which is fleet number 40. It was a Bedford J2 SZ10 with dual Midland bodywork. It was new to Saltburn Motor Services in 1965. In 1972, it was sold to Eagles and Crawford of Mould in North Wales, and that's the last recorded move of it. Then we've got 896 GUP. This is taken after the sale to Cleveland Transit. It's in Cleveland Transit's green and cream livery. It was fleet number 39 with Saltburn Motor Services. Correction, sorry, it wasn't. It was fleet number 52 for Saltburn Motor Services. Reading the wrong part of my notes there. Apologies for that. So yeah, Saltburn fleet number 52 became Cleveland Transit 339 and almost immediately S339. It was a Bedford SB1 with dual body, and it was new in May 1960 to Summerson Brothers, another one from them, or the Eden as they were known, of West Auckland. It was quite far travel actually. It was sold by them to J. Whiteford of Lanark in November 1965 up in southern Scotland, and it came back down to Saltburn Motor Services in June 1967. Survived with Cleveland Transit to 1976. It was withdrawn in March 1976, and it was sold to a dealer at Carlton in June of 1976. So quite a simple history for this one. This is TPY924H, which was Saltburn number 59, and became Cleveland Transit 353 and an S353. It was a Bedford VAM 70 with Plaxton Derwent body with 48 bus seats. Again, this photo was taken after the sale to Cleveland Transit. The bus was new to Saltburn Motor Services in August of 1970, and it was still with Cleveland Transit in 1986. It was quite long lived for a Bedford. There were lightweight chassis, normally didn't last that long. Standing next to it is 9191NW, which is still in the Saltburn Motor Services red and cream livery, as you can see. That was an AC Reliance with Plaxton bodywork. It was new to Wallace Arnold of Leeds in March 1959, and it was sent by them to the Devon operation. They operated quite an extensive network in Devon, as well as the Leeds area operations. It was transferred back to Leeds in October 1961 after the 1961 season, and it was sold to Saltburn Motor Services in April of 1970. It became Cleveland Transit fleet number 337, and it was withdrawn in 1975 and sold to Rollinson of Barnsley for scrap in November of 1975. Another one taken after the takeover by Cleveland Transit in Cleveland Transit livery. Sister vehicle to TPY924H. This is TPY925H, which was Saltburn fleet number 60 and became Cleveland Transit 354 and an S354. Another Bedford VAM 70, Plaxton Derwent 48 seat body, and it was new again in August 1970. It was kept by Cleveland Transit well into the 1980s. Again, it was still in service, I believe, in 1986. So we've got RGR 575. Bedford SB1 with Plaxton bodywork. Again, it's one with a localish registration, so you'd think it'd have a simple history, but far from it. It went through many owners in its lifetime. As you can see, this photo was taken after the Cleveland Transit takeover. It's in Cleveland livery. So it was new to White Brothers, who traded as White Ways of Sunderland in July of 1961. In May 1967, it was sold to R.D. Slater of Ryhope, also in Sunderland. And then at some point after that, an unknown date, it was sold to FN and J. Stratton, who traded as Redby Coaches, also of Sunderland. In May 1970 it moved out to the Sunderland area for the first time. It was sold to E&DM Viles of Haxby near York, and it found itself with the well-known dealers Stanley Hughes of Gummersall in West Yorkshire in January of 1973. Stanley Hughes sold it to Lovett of South Emsall in 1973, but it didn't stay with them very long. In October of that year it came to Saltburn Motor Services, where it was given the fleet number 64. Past the Cleveland Transit, as we can see, it became fleet number 340 and an S340, and then it was sold back to a dealer in Carlton in November of 1975, where its luck finally ran out and it was scrapped. So we've just got a few pictures of vehicles that were new to Cleveland Transit working on the former Saltburn services. This is parked in the car park in Gisborough, and this one is 374 RDC 974M, a Leyland Leopard with Plaxton Elite bodywork. It was new with 53 coach seats. As you can see, it's been fitted with bus seats by the time of this photograph, but it was new in January of 1974. I suspect the reseating to bus seats might have happened in about May 1980 when it was fitted with a luggage pen. The offside front seat was apparently removed and a luggage pen fitted in its place. But yeah, it's on one of the ex-Saltburn services. We'll see those in a moment. We're going to have a look through the timetable for Cleveland Transit in 1976. I'll just point out the old Saltburn services. It's quite an interesting vehicle here, 357. It's a Bedford YQ with duple dominant bus bodywork. It was new as a conventional length vehicle with 47 seats in December of 1974 as fleet number S357. Shortly after that they dropped the prefixes again, so it became just 357. In 1985 it was rebuilt. It was shortened and rebuilt to 35 seats. As you can see, the overhang at the rear has been cut off completely, so the bus has been made quite a bit shorter, and it was done for the Gisborough town services. Cleveland Transit had introduced some town services around Gisborough after they took over in the area. They were initially operated by some minibuses. There were a couple of Ford A-series, which were a bit like a Ford Transit but slightly heavier built. And there were a couple of Leyland 440 EAs as well. They were new in about 1975. By the early 80s they were becoming life expired, so they were replaced by a couple of these Bedfords that were rebuilt, as I say, shortened and made more suitable for going around narrow estate roads. So yeah, it re-entered service in March 1985, and in this shot it's parked in Gisborough between runs on the town service. I just found out that's what the previous bus would look like when it was new, with the overhang intact at the rear. This one isn't a Bedford, it's a Leyland Leopard. So fleet number 361, HEF 361N, and again it's parked in Gisborough on one of the former Saltburn services. So here is the timetable that I mentioned. It's from May 1976 until April 1977. So we've got the former Stokesley service, Saltburn to Stokesley via Gisborough, Route 71. Loftus to Moorshome will become a separate service according to this. Fleet number, service number should I say, 73. The Hollybush Estate service running there, service 75. And that was down to 2 services a day with a different time on Fridays and on Mondays to Thursdays. The former Loftus service was by this point running from Newmarsk through to Liverton Mines via Saltburn, and that was Route 74. Slightly off topic, there's the Gisborough town services. They weren't ex-Saltburn, but they were run from the ex-Saltburn depot. That's service 77. And there's the former Loftus to Blackpool service, the X10. Still running on Saturday only, this time just in the summer by the look of it. It possibly was always summer only, it's just not mentioned in the sources. It may have run all year round, it may not have done, but certainly by this point in time it was just a summer only service. As you can see, Loftus, Carlinhow, Broughton, Skelton, Saltburn, Marsk, Redcar, Gisborough, Great Ayton, Stokesley through to Blackpool. And there was a 30-minute refreshment stop at Gisborne in North Yorkshire. Back in the days before refreshments on coaches. So I mentioned at the start of the video that Saltburn Motor Services had a unique aspect to its operations. You can see what it was in this postcard of Saltburn, dating I think from the 1970s. So there's a miniature railway there just running along. So the railway, which had a 15-inch gauge, was founded in 1947 by Mr. H. Dunn of Bishop Auckland. In its first season, it ran a route of just 300 yards, although it was extended to terminate closer to the seafront for the second season in 1948. In 1953, the railway was acquired by Saltburn Motor Services. There was one locomotive which was a diesel powered by a Fordson tractor engine, although the bodywork had been made to look like a steam locomotive. In Mr. Dunn's day, passengers had first been carried in what were basically open goods wagons, which had been fitted with crew wooden seats. These were later replaced by some acquired bogie passenger carriages with reversible seats like you'd find in a tram, but Saltburn Motor Services replaced them with 4 16-seat purpose-built open carriages, which are the ones in this photograph. And they were built in their own workshops. The railway was operated for around 12 weeks every summer in the peak season, and it was run by full-time staff who returned to bus driving duties for the rest of the year. For some reason, the seasonal employees didn't seem to be trusted to run the railway. So yeah, they would drive buses for most of the year, and then for those 12 weeks they go and work on the railway. The line passed the Cleveland Transit with the rest of the business, and the new owners did operate it for the first season that they were in charge in 1975. And presumably for the tail end of the 1974 season as well, as it took over on the 1st of August. But they obviously didn't really take to railway operation, as they didn't persevere with it. There were various attempts to resurrect the line in the 1970s and the early 80s, but these came to naught, and the railway remained in a derelict condition. Happily, in 1983, the Saltburn Miniature Railway Association was formed to resurrect the line, and they succeeded in reopening it for the 1985 season. At that point, 2 of the Saltburn Motor Services built coaches were still operational, but they were later replaced by new rolling stock. The railway is still operational to this day, albeit still only in the summer, and it's taken delivery of more locomotives, newer stock as we said, and it's also been extended and is now around half a mile long. And just to finish, we've got a photo of the line today. This is by Haley Green. It's licensed under Creative Commons, license 2.0 for resharing. And it really is nice on this channel to report on something that's still there. Normally, obviously, my histories look at companies or lines, etc. that are no longer in existence. So it is lovely to report on something that's still running to this day. So yeah, there we go. A quick look at Saltburn Motor Services. Quite a distinctive and interesting little operation. As always, thank you very much for joining me. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you again soon. Bye for now.